realise we're running short on time and invite the first speaker from Team Propositions in Singapore to present their case.
Three million children die every year in Africa alone due to not being vaccinated. This is the very reason why we need to criminalize anti-vaccination claims to ensure that people are vaccinated and thus saved from the diseases. First of all, let's clarify several definitions for the debate. By vaccines, what do we mean by it? We mean that it's a biological agent that improves immunity to a particular disease for prolonged periods of time, and there's an extremely small window for vaccines to work, usually during childhood, after which the vaccine will be rendered ineffective due to the development of the person's immune system. Vaccines have to undergo multiple stringent tests by government bodies that specializes in pharmaceuticals before it's allowed to be put on the market and used on humans. Such examples of government bodies include the FDA in America. By overall benefits, refers to the effectiveness of vaccines in preventing and nearly eradicating various diseases for which they are designed for, such as rubella and polio, all of which were nearly extinct since in the development ever since the usage of vaccinations. By scientifically unfounded claims, it means statements with the intent to diminish the benefits of vaccinations, creating negative perceptions of it. These statements are not backed by any scientific research and have no empirical research or evidence to prove its claims. For something to be considered as scientifically unfounded, there needs to be an attempt to check that such a claim is not isolated and doesn't need to include high-end research, but rather to be able to corroborate evidence from various sources, such as consulting with doctors and checking with the above-mentioned government bodies. To criminalize, it means to make statements against the overall benefits of vaccines illegal and applies to both the private and public spheres. And the punishment of such a crime includes fines or jail terms or even both, which will be decided by the judiciary of the respective countries based on their own legal systems. This will be similar to criminalizing hate speech in society, as well as criminalizing the Holocaust denial, as governments of these countries recognize that such statements are detrimental to others in society. So today, side proposition will show that this policy best saves lives and provides the best way forward for the future of vaccinations. And we'll show you in our 5 main substantive arguments. The first being about preventing first-party harm, second about preventing third-party harm, and the third substantive is about disincentivizing people with malicious intent. And my second speaker will talk about decreasing the availability of vaccinations as well as improving scientific research. So now moving on to my first substantive argument, about preventing first-party harm, where the main idea is that criminalizing scientifically unfounded claims against vaccines reduces first-party harm and thus saves lives. Individuals are susceptible to scientifically founded claims due to fear and paranoia regarding their health, as every individual wants to take all precautionary measures to preserve their well-being at all costs. So what this means is that when there are scientifically unfounded claims against vaccines, it leads to anti-vaccine rhetoric being built up in society. And what this means is that it incentivizes people to not want to be vaccinated for fear of the harms that will be caused by these unfounded claims. They are educated in society will be easily convinced by such false claims and will not be vaccinated as a result. This will lead to a lack of immunity, and furthermore, because it's a very short window of time for children to be vaccinated before such vaccines are rendered as ineffective, should their parents be swayed by this anti-vaccine rhetoric, children are left vulnerable to these diseases. And these illnesses are highly detrimental to the physical well-being and body of the child. As well as it lowers the bone and muscle density of the child, and also lowers life expectancy significantly. And people who will not be vaccinated for certain illnesses will be susceptible to other forms and other strains of mutated illnesses of the same kind. And this will affect the child's prospect when he's grown up, and because he will be unable to contribute to the economy and workforce of the country. These children are unable to make decisions for themselves regarding the vaccinations, and thus the government has a burden to protect these people. But before that, yes sir.
Do you believe that religious beliefs, for example, are scientifically unfounded claims?
Yes sir. Religious beliefs are scientifically unfounded because they're not based by any scientific backing or research, and therefore we will criminalize such claims against religious claims. And furthermore, moving back to my substantive argument but since the government has the duty to protect these children, by removing these unfounded doubts and misgivings, only then can they allow for parents to vaccinate their children and during this short period of time, ensuring that the child's immunity is secured and thus saving the child's life. For example, measles was declared completely eradicated in 2000 with the widespread usage of vaccines. However, in 2013 and 2014, the rate of measles will increase because of 80% of these sufferers not wanting to be vaccinated, according to the Center for Disease Control. And this was the result of pervasive anti-vaccine campaigns within the United States of America, thus showing that scientifically unfounded claims can jeopardize the benefits that these vaccines have brought. So this brings me to my second argument about third-party harm, where the main idea of my argument is that scientifically unfounded claims against the overall benefits of vaccines should be criminalized as helps protect society from third-party harm. When there are scientifically unfounded claims against the overall benefits of society, of vaccines society will be misled by such claims, and they will not be want to be vaccinated for fear of their health and well-being. This will lead to lowered immunity and becoming more susceptible to illnesses, and there will be no protection and build their own natural immune system to combat this illness. Such diseases are highly contagious, and they are able to spread to other members of society, which may be fatal if treated over time. Furthermore, these diseases are currently different from the diseases in the past, as unlike the diseases in the past, which are able to be manifested and shown after a 2-week symptom, the new diseases are able to be manifested and dormant in the human body for much longer time. So what this means is that a person who contracted this illness will not be aware that he has this illness and will continue to go around society and will end up spreading this highly contagious and lethal disease to the rest of society because it's not reviewed yet. So what this means will bring about great harm to the rest of society as a result. And furthermore, this will harm other members of society who are not yet vaccinated because they are either too old and the vaccine will have little or no effect on them, or they are too young and their bodies will not be strong enough to be vaccinated. And lastly, they will be allergic to the vaccines, or they may be allergic to the vaccines, thus become vulnerable to diseases due to lack of vaccination. On the comparative, when such anti-vaccine rhetoric is removed from society, people will be incentivized to get vaccinated because there's a removal of the lack of this incentive, thus protecting not only themselves but the rest of societies, especially those who are unable to be vaccinated due to the above reasons. This leads to herd immunity and drastically reduces the spread of preventable diseases in society. For example, a study conducted by the University of California concluded that kindergarten children who were intentionally unvaccinated by their parents during the 2005-2010 period became susceptible to the onset of whooping cough. Fellow classmates who were not yet vaccinated through this also suffered from whooping cough because it was shown that by one person not having been vaccinated also suffered from whooping cough. Thus, will be third-party harm. This brings me nicely to my last substantive argument about disincentivizing people with malicious intent, where the main idea is that criminalizing scientifically unfounded claims against people prevents people with malicious intent from spreading anti-vaccine rhetoric in society. In some developing countries, there are strong religious fundamentalist movements, for example, Afghanistan and Pakistan, and where vaccines are seen as a ploy to spread Western imperialism and Western culture into their country. This will lead to the loss of their own local culture. These countries are also not good terms with the West due to years of conflict and distrust that occurred between these countries. This will lead to people regarding vaccines as a means to spread this imperialism, and this starts to do we want to discredit vaccines to prevent the spread of supposed Western imperialism, despite knowing the benefits of the vaccinations, and will deliberately choose to lie. This belief in things hence lowers vaccine intake and also leads to people being harmed in the process because they're not vaccinated. On the comparative, when you're removing such claims from society, you allow for people to be vaccinated, thus protecting society as a whole. For example, in January 2014, Pakistani Muslim clerics spread claims in society that vaccines given out by the World Health Organization was aimed to make Muslim men infertile, thus leading to gunning down and kidnapping of these vaccination workers, causing those to be revived within the Pakistani society. Therefore, in order to save lives, I am very proud to stand on side proposition.
Surround sound clapping going on there with the timing. Thank you very much to the first speaker for opening the debate. Now I invite the speaker to continue to present the case of the opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, before I start rebutting the argument of Team Proposition, I would just like to make one thing clear. We on Team Proposition think that vaccines are great. We think that it is, as you say, the best thing since sliced bread. Or no, we think that it's the best invention of humanity since agriculture, since the invention of the weed, since the invention of fire. Vaccines might even be the reason for which you and I stand here today, which Team Proposition has made very clear. However, their whole arguments are based upon the fact that limiting, outlawing all unscientifically founded claims against vaccine will actually increase the number of people getting vaccinated. This is simply not true. And I will show you why in our substantive material. But first, which are going to be based on three main arguments. First of all, that the basis of a debate is to counter the argument of the opposition and not just and not just silencing the opposition. Secondly, that this restriction of freedom of speech, which Team Proposition actually is proposing, will lead to a slippery slope for more and more more and more freedom will be restricted. And thirdly, that because there are, our third argument is that because there are no absolute truths within medicine and within biology, we will need to have an enormous arbitrariness and enormous subjectivity within the system upon which the governments decide what is a scientific claim and what is a scientific claim. So, Team Proposition claims, as an example, first of all, they say that religion is not, religious views aren't a reason for which you can't get vaccinated. Practically what they're saying is that we can discard all religious beliefs in the world. And honestly, what they're practically saying is that practically you want to ban religious views, which, no thank you. Religion is one of the core principles of the human rights. Secondly, they say that they say that this will be seen as imperialism. For example, in Muslim countries, in Pakistan, that you will see that they see vaccination as something that the Western world wants to take into Pakistan and spread their culture there. Well, won't it even be more imperialistic for the Western world to actually force them to impose a ban on all statements, all negative statements?
No,
thank you. So, moving on to substantive material. The reason for which we don't want to outlaw, the main reason for which we don't want to outlaw scientific claims on vaccines is that the way to win a debate is to counter arguments, not silencing the opposition. What we could do today during this debate is actually say, no, Team Proposition can't speak. We will find Team Proposition. But will that convince Team Proposition that they are wrong? No. Will that convince the adjudicators that they are wrong? No. Will that convince the spectators here that Team Proposition is wrong? No, it won't. The reason why it's always better to counter the arguments of the opposition is
point of information.
Yes, sir.
If your side believes so strongly in the freedom of religion, will your side allow for honor killings and sati, which is the ritual burning of widows?
Sorry, can you take that again?
Okay. If your side stands for religious freedom, will your side stand for honor killings as well as sati, which is the religious burning of widows?
No, we don't stand for that. But what we do stand for is vaccination, and we stand for we want the highest amount of people in the world to get vaccinated. And the way to do that is actually having a real debate about vaccination. When you remove all the people that don't advocate the overall benefits of vaccination, you won't actually convince anybody. These people will still think that vaccines are bad. The people that already listen to them will still think that these things are bad. If you impose that to our view, where you actually let these people that think that vaccines are bad publish their thoughts in newspapers, publish their thoughts on the internet, where we, the people that think that vaccines are good, can counter these arguments and actually show them why they are wrong. We can convince them that vaccines are great, that vaccines actually benefit humanity, which is what we in the end want. In their system, these people will still think that vaccines are bad, and they will still try to convince people that vaccines are bad, even though they're getting fined. In our system, we actually have the opportunity to counter them and to convince them about the overall benefits of vaccination. So therefore, because in order to win a debate, you need to counter the argument and not simply silencing the people that don't agree with you, we beg you not to pass this motion. Secondly, what Team Proposition wants to do, and this is moving on to our second argument, is that they want to restrict the freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is something that is a core principle of our human right, which is guaranteed by the UN. And why is freedom of speech such an important basic right? Well, because freedom of speech is the core principle of democracy. If you have freedom of speech, all views will be put forward, all opinions, all ideas will be put forward, all of them will be evaluated, and the best opinion and the best idea will get adopted. This is something that doesn't happen if you restrict freedom of speech. Even though their restriction is a really small one, this might lead to a slippery slope. Why, if this benefits society so much, why don't you outlaw all scientific claims that speeding is bad? If I'm claiming that no, speeding does not does not increase the risk of death while driving so much, why don't you outlaw that claim? It's the same. No, thank you. It's the same basic argument, and this might lead to a slippery slope where the freedom of speech in the country. Is gradually downgraded and gradually will disappear. So basically, what we can see here is that what they are proposing, both teams agree on one basic principle, that vaccines are one of the most important inventions that humanity has ever seen. Yes, as they clearly have stated, loads of children have been slain in Africa, vaccine might even be the reason for which you and I are able to stand here today, the reason for which we have increased child mortality that much during these past couple of years. But we completely disagree on the fact that how we're going to get the maximum number of people vaccinated. We are proposing a model where we actually counter the argument of the opposition, trying to convince them that why vaccines are bad, trying to avoid the dead dogma where we actually just silence the opposition and still letting them having their opinion, and instead what we are proposing is to counter it and to showing them why vaccines are so fantastic. Secondly, we are standing not only for vaccination, but we are standing for freedom of speech, the basic human rights, which the team proposition are totally neglecting and totally disregarding. Thank you very much.
It became very clear throughout their first speaker's speech that opposition never understood the link that my first speaker illustrated throughout his entire speech. That firstly, unfounded claims would spread throughout society in the absence of any law criminalizing them. Thus, there is no disincentive to prevent people from spreading these claims on an enormously wide scale. And all of this, on the second level, creates an enormous impression on the public. It changes their attitudes towards vaccines, and because of that, the third link, there is less consumption of vaccines on the whole. That is why all of the harms that my first speaker brought to you will come to pass, and that is why we need propositions policy to ensure that the people in society continue to remain under the protection of vaccines. Indeed, opposition conceded that vaccines are beneficial, but their own model prevented vaccines from reaching the greatest amount of people. This is completely unjustified, and let's take down their case in three main points of contention. Firstly, on the idea of discourse and persuading individuals. Secondly, on the idea of freedom of speech. And thirdly, on their responses to my first speaker's argumentation.
Point, sir.
No, thank you, sir. On the first point of contention of discourse, and here's where they essentially told us that open discussion would be a more persuasive means of convincing the people in society that vaccines were good, hence leading to greater distribution of vaccines. Now, we agree that people need to be convinced as to the benefits of vaccines, but the mechanism that opposition is forwarding is entirely false. Because let's draw a comparative. Under opposition's model, they would allow unscientific claims to continue circulating on the public sphere to be rebutted by certain individuals. I'll take you in a moment, sir. However, what this causes is an indelible impression that these claims spread in the first place, and these falsehoods still make an impression on the public, and here's where people are fed the wrong information. But before I continue, go ahead, sir.
Yes. we actually want these unscientific claims to be on the market, to be in newspapers, to be on the internet, in order for us to be able to disprove these claims.
So what you don't realize is that firstly, disproving these claims isn't going to be convincing at all. Because people are exposed to the loudest stimuli that they receive, the first stimuli that they receive. Using all these channels of media that your side has
Point of information, sir.
it will cause the greatest amount of effect, and they are more likely to be influenced by this initial claim, rather than the rebuttal that arrives at a later date and at a lower volume. That's why your side is ultimately more harmful for discourse. On the comparative, where we have a law criminalizing unscientific claims, the claims that are forwarded to the public are those that are backed by scientific information, that are verifiable by experimentation. And all of these are ultimately more convincing for the public because they do believe in these figures and statistics that are produced through the research process, through the scientific process, and this is ultimately more persuasive in getting them to consume vaccines on the whole. Moving on to my second point of contention on the idea of freedom of speech. And here's where opposition essentially told us that freedom of speech is good, that's why we have to preserve it. But we need to contextualize this to the reality in society, where absolute freedoms do not exist. Rather, what needs to happen is that freedom of speech is moderated by governments because there is third-party harm inflicted, which was all of the argumentation that my first speaker brought to you. And in the presence of these harms, we recognize the need to clamp down on certain rights, or at least curtail them to a limited extent, to ensure that these harms don't spread on a wider level. Here's where we draw a parallel to laws preventing individuals from spreading hate speech, from defaming other individuals. These are laws in place precisely because there are harms, and these are laws that curtail freedom of speech. No, thank you, sir, because it is necessary. Indeed, this is extremely relevant to vaccines because in the absence of vaccines, there is harm incurred. We need to prevent this harm from occurring, and that's why freedom of speech needs to be prevented. Now moving on to very quickly to my third point of contention on their responses to my first speaker. And because of this, in their rebuttal, they ultimately conflated the ideas of first and third party harm that my first speaker brought to you, when these were actually very distinct ideas. On the idea of first party harm, we recognize the benefits or detriments to the individual where vaccines were imparted or not received because of the amount of discourse in society, whether or not we legalize these unscientific claims or not. On the idea of third-party harm, we recognize the impact on the community around the individual when he was influenced by these unscientific claims and thus chose not to get himself vaccinated. These are very distinct ideas, and the logic links in those arguments were never concretely rebutted by the opposition side. And this is significant because they concede that the impacts of vaccination will occur, as we described in our first speaker. Now, on the idea of malicious intent, opposition merely questioned the link that we drew to the notion of imperialism without actually taking it down. They were completely skirting the logic when they told us that imperialism would occur in any case and that this was an imposition under our policy. What we need to recognize is that we need this policy to send a strong message that no, unscientific claims are unacceptable, and this will thus influence these individuals who harbor malicious intent to change their stance. That's all of their material dealt with. I'm now transitioning to my own constructive arguments. Firstly, on denying public access to vaccines. And the main idea of this argument is that criminalizing scientifically unfounded claims acts as protection and hence an incentive for pharmaceutical firms to continue producing vaccines, thus achieving the greatest level of benefit. The premise of this argument is that vaccines constitute a large proportion of the revenues and profits of these pharmaceutical firms. They invest large amounts in research and development and expect to recoup it because immunization programs are large scale and because demand for vaccines is extremely high. But however, when there exist pervasive and widespread unscientific claims against vaccines, public faith in vaccination is severely eroded, and the impressionable public is influenced and hence less willing to accept vaccination, leading to an overall fall in demand. And the result of this is dramatically reduced incentive for firms to continue the manufacture of vaccines, because demand falls, supply falls as well, and so they halt production in favor of more lucrative products. Less vaccines are thus available, denting public access to immunization, harming government initiatives to immunize their populations, ultimately leaving individuals vulnerable to infectious disease. This is completely unjustifiable. We give you the example of Aventis Pharmaceutical, which due to low demand for its vaccine products, cut production of its vaccines by 30 million doses. And that's 30 million people who went without vaccines and were harmed as a consequence. And because of these impacts to pharmaceutical firms, we need to implement this policy to ensure that unscientific claims are not spread on this wide scale. Moving on to my final argument on improving scientific research. This argument will prove that science requires truthful information to secure progress, and hence outlawing scientifically unfounded claims ensures critique that is useful and better contributes to the development of vaccines. Here's also where we counter the entire idea of discourse, how scientific discourse is actually better under propositions paradigm. In the absence of criminalization, individuals are free to express their own views, and this liberal paradigm hence allows for all of these claims to spread in a